Hello, everybody. This is the Fascination Stream. I'm your co-host, Mika Pearson, and your host, Jimmy Pearson.
Hey, everyone. How are you?
Today, we are interviewing Ray.
Davis.
Davis.
That's it.
I'm trying to
Put
think
it all
of
on the
more
hop
words.
straight away.
I know.
Way. Just straight in. There you go.
And now I'm going to pass over to the host.
Right. So, as you've probably been following all this week, we've had quite a pretty full-on week. How's your week been? Has it been a good week?
It's been a real good week.
Another week without school.
Mm.
But you've done lots and lots and lots of cool stuff,
Where
right?
did we go
Yeah.
today?
Yeah. Where did you go today?
Dinchurch.
And where did we go at the start of the week?
Dover Castle.
Yeah, we did. So that's it. So Mika's had a great week. I've unfortunately been back to work. And we'll leave that one there. And also, joining us as always is producer Sarah.
Good evening, guys.
And next to her, as always, is the faithful
He's down there.
Fascination Street dog, Dougie.
Dougie.
Doug. Up. Over it.
Whoa.
There we go. Hello, everyone.
There he is. Crazy,
He's
crazy.
confused.
Crazy dog. So, as you may have seen, on Thursday this week, Sarah and I have dropped our first audio podcast. It's been a long time in the making. We didn't think we'd get it out. We've still got a few tech problems that we're trying to work through.
What kind of tech problems?
It's all complicated.
Right.
As with everything, it says plug and play, but it's not plug and play. You've got to do bits. So yeah, but we finally got out a nice primitive version of it, which I thought was pretty good.
Yeah, like a pilot.
Yeah. So it's only half hour long.
That's all right. Could be.
But the actual show, once we get it up and running, will be a little bit longer. We have now started doing adverts. So if any of our friends have anything that they're doing, if they have any shows that they want promoting or anything like that, please just get hold of us. And what we'll do is we will fit you into our podcast, au gratis. Yeah, that's right. Au gratis. Free. Because obviously you're our friends and we want to let people know about what you're up to. We've already done adverts this week for our friend Erik Stitt and Dave Partridge at Shadows of Your Mind. So if anyone else is interested, just hit us up. And we'll do it free. Unless, of course, you're totally minted, then we'll charge you a couple of £1,000.
No,
No?
£1.
£1. One whole British quid. There we go.
Or an American buck.
Oh, $1. Mika wants an American buck. I want a Canadian $5 because they've got an astronaut on it, and that would look really cool with my collection.
Okay, so that's what we're going to be charging you guys.
$5 Canadian with an astronaut on it.
And I'm going to have $1 American dollar.
Right. Anyway,
let's get
enough
back to the
about
show.
our shows. Should we get on to our show?
Right, yeah.
Right. Normally at this point we do the bio section, but the gentleman that we have with us this evening, he exceeds all bios. He is just brilliant in every way. He's also one of our oldest friends that we've had since we've joined the family of the Fringe. Ray, take it away and introduce yourself to the world.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on, Jimmy and Mika. Thank you so much for having me, guys. Well, gosh, where do I start with the story of Ray? I mean, it's 54 years long at this point, which is a good thing. The other option is awesome.
We've got an hour and a quarter until we go to questions, so start at the beginning, Ray. I'll just grab some lemon and ginger and sit back, enjoy.
Well, I spent the first 50 years of my life in the U.S. state of Kansas, which, for those of you who know the geography in the U.S., is kind of right in the middle of the country. And about 4 years ago, my wife and I moved to Boston. She took a job up here, and my day job, fortunately, was one that I could kind of just put my laptop under my arm and follow her. So we've been enjoying some time here, and now we're getting ready to move back to Kansas because we are two-time grandparents and perhaps more on the way. So, so 1,500 miles has become
optimistic.
Yeah.
Optimism, yeah.
Continue.
But by day, I write training for a large company, sales training. And then on the side, since 2007, I've been running something called the Affirmation Spot, which is a kind of a motivational platform where I put out information and motivation to people every day to, I don't know, probably about 60,000 followers across my various platforms. And my goal there is, and this all kind of ties into the stuff we're going to talk about tonight, but I think it's so important when you look around the world right now for people to have an empowered mindset. You know, one of the reasons that we have the world we do, I think, is because a lot of average people don't believe they can participate, don't believe they can pull themselves up and move forward and have a great life. And they're waiting kind of for someone to do it, or they're waiting for someone to tell them how. And I think we all have something great within us. And so I just try to inspire that every day as much as I possibly can. About 4 years ago now, I released my first novel, which was Anunnaki Awakening, which is probably the reason we're talking about this tonight. Had just a great response to that, you know, really good feedback on it. I've gotten to do some fun things like go on Fade to Black with Jimmy Church. That was pretty cool. Like a fan moment kind of. And
were you a fan before?
Oh, absolutely. I've always loved Jimmy. Used to listen to him all the time when he used to, you know, sub for George. So yeah, love Jimmy. So that book's done quite well, you know, relatively so. I'm not chasing J.K. Rowling down on the book charts just yet, but hopefully book 2 will make that happen. And I am working on that right now. And then about 2 years ago, Dennis Nappy II, who I know, Jimmy, you know, and I started something called Sixth Sense Media. And really what our goal is with that platform is to try to do kind of what you guys are doing. That is share this kind of information out into the world. You know, by this kind of information, I mean, you know, the paranormal, things that don't get covered too much by the mainstream media, just kind of offer a different perspective. And kind of what I like to infuse into that, going back to the affirmation spot, is also a positive perspective, if I can. There's a lot of challenges on our planet right now, but I believe we have it within us to do something about them. And so that really should be our goal. And I want people to feel empowered, but I also want them to kind of open their minds, because I think we have all been given by our respective societies kind of a box of information that they want us to have. And you're not really allowed to think outside that box. And most people spend most of their lives not thinking outside that box. And so what we're talking about is quite scary for a lot of people, and I understand that. But I really think it's time for us to kind of grow up as a species, if I may say that, and
absolutely.
You know, reach out and kind of be you know, I think join the community out in this galaxy that I believe is out there. So we can talk about that some more as we go on here tonight. But that's 54 years in a nutshell. So.
Well, and you done that in like 2 minutes. So if that's how you do 50, honestly, I'd like to read one of the books.
Oh, and I love roller coasters. How about that? We'll add that.
There we go. Any other random Ray Davis fact that we don't know?
Well, I do have. You have the Fascination Street dog. I have a 15-year-old lab, or about to be 15. She's my best buddy. We do 3 walks a day still, and she's hanging in there. So we love her to death. And my wife and I are, like I said, are getting ready to move back across country here shortly. And so those are kind of the big things going on in our world right now.
That's it. Yeah, because I follow a lot of your videos. I watch a lot of your videos, and like as you were saying earlier about the affirmation spot as well. I mean, there's so many beautiful things on there. I mean, if you don't mind talking a little bit more about the affirmation spot as well for us, Ray, because I think it's something that a lot of people really could do with just popping over and having a look at, because there's a couple there in the past that I've looked at and I've used myself, and you know, and there's certain sort of like phrases and that I use myself to when I'm down, I'm feeling low. There's a couple that I've always had since I got to know you and got to find out the power of affirmation that I use during that time when I just need that little bit more oomph. And people, honestly, I think if they give it a go, they'd be surprised how well it works, just for that extra moment when you need to dig really deep just to bring that extra thing out. So if you wouldn't mind taking that way for us, Ray. Sure,
absolutely. Well, first of all, I will say that, you know, I also need affirmations. The reason I got into affirmations 30 years ago is because, you know, I found that about, I would say 80 to 90% of people do not have a positive default setting. Most of us live in this world. It's a struggle, and it's hard to keep yourself positive. It's swimming upstream a little bit. So I started using affirmations for myself and continue to this day. But really, all an affirmation is a positive statement that you repeat over and over again to try to replace negative thoughts. I like to say that we are doing affirmations in our heads all the time, whether we know it or not. I can't is an affirmation. I'll never do that. I'm never good enough. You know, and some of this stuff is stuff that was in our heads from the time we were in grade school, or something our parent said to us at some point in time, or a friend, and we took it to heart too much, and it's running around in our head, and they're, you know, causing problems, and we're trying to achieve something, and it can really cause us to self-sabotage, if I can say that. And so affirmations are simply a way. I mean, there's a lot of tools you can use to help yourself in that way, but affirmations are just something you say to yourself over and over and over again. And our brain really works in a way. It is a very easily conditioned instrument, and as the powers that be well know. And we have to be I say, do our own ad campaign for ourselves, because there are people ready to fill our minds with other information. And if we let them, they will. But if we choose to intake the information that we want, that helps us, that benefits us and the people around us, then that much the better. So that's kind of what that's all about.
Yeah, fantastic. And we will get a link out for that one in the show description as well. So that's pretty cool. If you got that one, the affirmation spot. You got your Twitter there. I'll fire it up for you. See, we are so prepared. We really are.
And I will add, right now I'm on day 110. I'm doing a 365 days to a better you blog series this year. I committed to do a blog every single day in 2019, and we're about a third of the way through almost. And so you can find that on my blog as well. All of it won't resonate with you. Everything's not going to be something that you need to hear, but just take the stuff that does and use it. That's what I say. So
it's scary that we're like 110 days in, right?
Wow.
All the way through the year. Where does time go?
Where lost socks go, I think.
That multiverse void out there. Yeah, somewhere out in the Boaties void. It's got to be there. That's where I'm putting my money anyway. All right, so just bear with me, Ray. We're just getting your details, because otherwise Sarah would have gone elsewhere. Right, cool. So the story of the Anunnaki, Ray. Oh, I'll wait for you to finish your water. Where does it begin?
So the story of the Anunnaki is a long and involved one, and there's a lot of aspects to it. I think both in understanding what it is and also what the proofs for this theory are. And it is a theory. Let's be honest. I mean, none of us has a complete grasp on the truth from 6 or 8, 10,000 years ago. So, we're doing the best we can to piece together what we have. And I come at it from a number of different angles. But who they are essentially is they were the gods of the ancient Sumerians. So the ancient Sumerians, as your listeners may know, are generally considered to be the oldest culture. I say in this go around because I know there's people like Graham Hancock who are investigating probably older civilizations that existed. I think we've had cycles on this planet of Earth-based advanced civilizations, and we're just kind of the latest iteration. And Sumeria seems to be the birthplace of that reiteration. And the gods that they worshipped were called the Anunnaki. A gentleman named Zacharias Sitchin back in the 1970s started writing a series of books called the Earth Chronicles that detailed, he basically grew up speaking Hebrew, and Hebrew is a is like a great grandchild of Sumerian. And so there are a lot of similarities between those two languages. And he got interested in this because he was studying the Bible in school when he was a small child. And the whole thing in Genesis 6, where it talks about the giants, on the earth that mated with the daughters of men and that sort of thing. He asked the question because he knew the Hebrew word there was not giant. It actually meant, beings from above or beings from the sky, the Nephilim. And so he asked that question. It kind of started a lifelong fire for him. He wrote this series of books and basically detailed, and you have to remember in the 1970s, not only was there not a Sumerian dictionary, even in academic circles, there was very little known in the public sphere about the Sumerians or their texts. These weren't discovered until like the 1870s, and most of the people who had been interpreting them up until then really had been coming at it from, I would say, a really religious perspective, and at first didn't realize that these were older than the book of Genesis. They thought they must have been something that happened after Genesis. But as we can talk about as we kind of go through this, you clearly see that these texts precede Genesis, and that the first 11 books of Genesis seem to be pulled from that Sumerian background, which is where Abram came from. So anyway, he wrote this series of books. It kind of blew up into bestsellers. It's kind of become a thing. To some people, it's kind of culty, perhaps. The mainstream does not like it at all. And when I say the mainstream, I mean both religion and science, because it really threatens both of their paradigms about how the world operates. And so the Anunnaki basically were the Sumerian gods. And what the Sumerians said about them, there's a big debate now, especially since Sitchin died, about whether or not he was a good interpreter of these texts or not. There's a gentleman named Michael Heiser who has a really well-known site. In fact, if you search Zachariah Sitchin on Google, the first thing that comes up is sitchiniswrong.com, which is Michael Heiser's site. And it basically talks about, he says that he was not an expert in the text, that he misinterpreted all of this. And there's kind of been this big debate kind of right at the end of Sitchin's life. He died in 2010. And then since then about whether or not, this was all made up and that kind of thing. I tend to look at it that regardless of who translates these texts, there are three things that I think we can say for sure: that the Anunnaki, that the Sumerians say that the Anunnaki came from the sky or from space, as we might think of it today. They say that they lived among them. They created them, I should say. They created them by genetically modifying them. That seems to be, based on any interpretation of the text, what they're saying. And they lived and ruled them for some period of time. And it doesn't really matter who interprets it, that those facts are true. Now, what Sitchin did is he took this information and what I would say kind of put space age eyes on it, right? I mean, it's one thing to be a grammarian in ancient Sumerian and say, well, this word isn't right, or he didn't do that. But he was looking at the big picture and saying, what would that mean to someone in the 20th century looking at that rather than someone back in the day? And that's, I think, where he kind of goes awry with a lot of the mainstream, academics in this, is they are, I would compare it to this. It's like arguing about the grammar of Macbeth and missing the story. I think Sitchin is getting the story from our perspective, and they're over here twiddling, I think, about, is it thou shalt, whatever, that kind of thing. So that's kind of where it goes. So that's kind of where this all started and how it kind of blew up into our modern world. So, beginning in the late 1800s, second half of the 19th century, you started having, there were Egyptologists and there were people that went to what is modern day Iraq, which is where Sumer was, and they began digging these things up. There's a lot of them unread, untranslated, sitting in museums all over the world, all over Europe and the United States now. So there's just a lot we still don't know, but that's basically who they are.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So where did they come from and why did they come here, Ray?
Right. So what Sitchin said is that they were a spacefaring advanced race that came from a planet called Nibiru, that he said is in a 3,600-year orbit around our sun. It's an elliptical orbit, so it's not on the same plane as the rest of the planets as they circle the sun. And that when the planet came in close to Earth on its rotation, the Anunnaki often came here. And at some point in time, so I'll start with his story. His story is that they had atmospheric problems on their planet, and it was damaging their atmosphere, kind of similar to what we have going on in our world today, perhaps. And they found that by suspending gold in their atmosphere, that would help mitigate those issues. And so the best place in the solar system that they had found to find gold was here on Earth. So they sent an expedition to the Earth, and he estimates that this happened sometime around 400 to 445,000 years ago. And they began mining. They landed somewhere in the Persian Gulf in the area that we would now call, Iraq, that area. And eventually they found the best place on the planet for gold was in South Africa. And so they began mining this themselves. Well, not in a few years, but over time, the lower class Anunnaki kind of got tired of doing this work. It's really hard work. They kind of rebelled against the two leaders of the expedition, who were Enlil and Enki, who were the two princes from Nibiru. And they came up with the idea, or Enki came up with the idea, of creating a slave race, basically, human beings, by taking the hominids that they found here on the Earth at that time and mixing just enough of their DNA with that to kind of bring us up to a level where we could do their bidding. Basically, we'd have language and that kind of thing. And there was a lot of trial and error. If you look at the text, they had to try this over and over again to get this right, get a being right, which could explain some of the different branches of hominids that we see in our past now that we can't seem to quite put all the pieces together with that. But we do know that genetically, and most historians agree now, that modern, Homo sapiens sapien, us, emerged very suddenly about 200,000 years ago. That there's not really a true link that we can find right now that really shows how that happened exactly. And this story of them genetically engineering us, really kind of fills a gap there in explaining how we came to be, on the scene so quickly.
So it may have been just sort of like I don't know, maybe a natural kind of evolution that we've kind of gone from that to this over a period of time.
Right. So, obviously there were creatures here that theoretically had evolved on this planet. That maybe, as I said, I think we've had many circles. If you get into like, Jainism or Hinduism, they talk about these massive cycles of time that repeat, and that civilizations have come and gone over time. And it kind of reminds me of, we have subduction on our planet, right? Where we know that the crusts move under themselves. So if something was on this planet 300 million years ago, we would not find any evidence of it because it's down in the center of the earth someplace.
Right.
So I think there's, I think I don't know where I was going with that. Totally lost my train of thought.
But that's one of the amazing things that I find, like when people say about Atlantis being the Eye of Africa. I mean, it fits all the criteria, right? But again, even if you're excavating there, the amount of time that it would have been, then, and again, with time cycles, and I mean, we know maybe Antarctica was once like a lush forest land and things like that. What we're going through at the moment with the natural, say natural, the warming, the global warming, and things like that. I mean, all right, I'm sure we really haven't done any favors along the way, but how do we know that it's not another one of the natural cycles that it goes through every 10,000 years or so? Because we don't know, do we? I mean,
no, we
a
don't.
lot of what we think we know about science and things like that is only theoretical anyway.
Yes.
There's only certain things we can prove which were definite. Because, I mean, when you think of like space, certain quantum physics, other certain forms of mechanics, and that, again, they were only hypothesized. And now we're starting to understand, even like finding like the black hole this week, that a lot of what we thought we knew, we don't actually know.
It's true.
So
I think science, I love science. People think I'm criticizing science when I say stuff like this, but science speaks in terms that religion has always spoken, in absolutes. They don't say this is a theory that, we have a lot of evidence for this. We can't really fully prove it. It's a theory we have. They act like it's like we have all the facts and we know this is the way it happened. And I love Neil deGrasse Tyson. I remember watching when he did the reload of Cosmos, the old Carl Sagan series a few years ago. Yeah. And he's sitting here describing how a dinosaur's eye evolved. And I'm like, how do we know that? We don't really know that. You're making up a complete story from nothing. But if someone without credentials came up with a story like that, you would be laughed out of existence. And you'd never be allowed on Twitter again or something, So
yeah, right, absolutely. It'd be like, I don't know, the Astro Alex Jones.
That's
you can't
right.
say things like that. Absolutely. I mean, he lost, like, for me, all credibility was lost for him when he kind of done his bit after the A-Tip videos first came out. And he went on a couple of shows and he really, really made himself out to be an absolute goonie. He really, really did. And it was just, how can you be this guy who talks about space and the possibility of all these things, but yet this doesn't exist, or they don't exist, or they can't exist, or...
Of course they can't exist.
No, I'm talking. He's saying about UFOs and things like that.
They do exist, but like people just say they don't. When really, we all know that we're not the only people.
Yeah, but this guy's an astrophysicist, and he studies space. But he's open to the possibility of life on other planets, but yet isn't open to the idea that they're kind of buzzing about and flying about and visiting and stuff like that.
That's trash talk.
It's trash talking. That's what I mean. That's how the guy, and he was like one of the most respected, like on TV, wasn't he? At one point,
yes.
And then he comes up with something like that, and I'm like, mate, do you know what?
Tough.
Well,
we just can't be friends anymore.
Well, and the reason they're all sure of that is another theory that they have. Albert Einstein's a really smart guy, and he came up with this idea that nothing can go faster than the speed of light, right? So they're consumed with this idea that it's impossible for anyone to ever develop a technology that can do that. Well, I'm saying that's kind of like you know, a Stone Age man saying, how could you ever have an airplane, right? You could never fly 600 miles an hour at 30,000 feet. Come on.
Yeah.
We just don't know enough to know that. And they make these hard and fast assumptions and tell us this is the truth. And that's what, because I know he's too smart to know that that's not possible. But
Yeah.
it's kind of like the media, right? They kind of play this game, they have their narratives, and they just don't get off them at all. And they've done this with this Anunnaki thing as well. You know, this is, if you want to get the scientific types and religious types, who a lot of times don't mix too well, together on something, start talking about the Anunnaki and how, you know, it might feed into some of the things we're doing. And pretty quick, they close ranks and say, no, we can't talk about that, because it's a threat to both of them. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's again, it's belief. I mean, ancient aliens, etc., etc. I mean, there's more than enough. I mean, even you've only got to look at, like, I don't know, the Sumerian, like, clay tablets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that for me is, it's mind blowing. I mean, how on earth? Sorry, you go first, Roy.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you
I
off.
was going to say, like, the detail of, like, you know, the hundreds of years that everyone, you know, were getting, like, killed, like, for even suggesting that the sun was the center of our solar system and things like that. But yet it had been out there all this time before.
All this time. And, you know, it's we didn't talk about the Sumerians themselves. I mean, what's interesting about the Sumerian culture is, based on what we know, and again, we may have pieces that we don't know, but this is a culture that blew up almost overnight, and suddenly had, you know, I think someone's listed off like 100 of the firsts of human civilization, or at least this go around of human civilization. I mean, from living among the reeds there between the Tigris and Euphrates, they suddenly had this culture. And in their writings, they tell you where they got that information. They got it from the gods, the Anunnaki. And we, you know, our mainstream thinking is, our scientific modern 21st century thinking is, well, that's just all myth. You know, that's how they dismiss it, right? That they just were weaving tales to try to help them understand the universe and that kind of thing. But I think what Sitchin and myself and a lot of other people, you know, there's a lot of great researchers in this field that people can follow up on. Like Gerald Clark is a good one. Michael Tellinger has done a lot of good work in this field. There's I just did it again, Jimmy. I was going to say that they tell us that the gods gave them this information, and yet we say, well, that's just myth, and yet we can't explain how they suddenly did this. Just like we can't explain how suddenly modern human beings, emerged in a way that's not really consistent with Darwinian, you know, practices at all. So, but they kind of gloss over those things and pretend like they have all the answers still.
Yeah, of course. It's weird, because I mean, you mentioned the Anunnaki, and, you know, a lot of people think that it's such a controversial, you know, subject to touch upon. I mean, there was a couple of people that actually asked us when we said, what do you want to see, that actually asked us for Anunnaki.
Mm-hmm.
And I was genuinely a bit worried because, again, I don't really know a great deal. I mean, pretty much anything that I know of the Anunnaki is either what I've heard, either Donny Arcade singing about, certain bits and pieces that I've heard Billy Carson talk about, Jimmy Church, yourself, because I've listened to a lot of your interviews in the past.
Is it kind of like the Egyptians?
Before.
Blimey.
And only another couple of 100,000 years before.
What?
100,000.
That's the beginning of the world.
Now this is just getting into my next bit. So, who were the main movers and shakers of the Anunnaki, Ray?
Okay, so the king, as Sitchin would say it, the chief god, as the academics would say it, was a god called An, or Anu, depending on which language you look at it. Because you have to remember, the Sumerian culture became the Akkadian culture, became the Babylonian culture, and then it's all kind of grouped together by the Greeks as Mesopotamia. So that's kind of how we think of it. And today, it's modern day Iraq is basically what it is. But the main movers and shakers, so An, or Anu, sent his two sons to Earth to do this gold mining operation, according to Zechariah Sitchin. They were Enlil and Enki. And Enlil was called the, it's going out of my mind here. He was basically he's a military leader, right? Kind of a dictatorial type of figure who was like, let's get this done, let's do this. Enki was kind of more of a scientist, probably more artistic, I would suppose, because he had kind of a heart, you might see as we go on later on. And then, they had their spouses, their children that eventually came to Earth. We have, Marduk was Enki's son. We have Inanna, who is the kind of the key figure in my book, who was the kind of the chief goddess. And a lot of the stories that we see coming into the Egyptian mythologies and even Greece and into Europe and also into the Bible came from these stories that we see these gods being told about these gods back in Sumeria. So, for instance, the flood story. There's a Sumerian Noah who is warned by Enki. So in the Bible stories, we all know God decides to destroy the world, but he finds favor with Noah and he decides to save him. And he tells him that this is going to happen, has him build the ark. In the Sumerian version of the story, Enlil decides that he's going to destroy human beings. And Enki feels bad because he helped create them, helped genetically engineer them. And he warns humanity and basically the Sumerian Noah and helps him escape. Well, that kind of puts him in bad stead with the other Anunnaki because it had been decided in a council they were going to do this. They weren't going to tell the humans. It was time for the humans to go. And so he kind of became a rebel in that way. Inanna also, among other things, she was a rather amorous creature, I would guess you would say, but she also seemed to have an affinity for human beings. So the way this kind of comes down into our modern world today is, we see all the conflict in the Middle East today, and you still see the strains of this brotherly feud sort of at work in the Middle East today. Yahweh, there's a number of evidences for this that, I'd be happy to provide for you guys, but Yahweh, who we typically think of as the God of Israel and kind of became by default the God of Christianity and Muslims believe of Islam, was, I believe, Enlil. There's a number of reasons I think this. Yahweh was the second son of a god, as was Enlil. Enlil was actually the younger son, but he actually was the heir to Anu's throne because he was actually, because of who his mother was. Enki was, it was basically kind of a subordinate. And you see this same second son thing go all throughout the Old Testament. You see Isaac and Jacob, and you see Abraham with Isaac and Ishmael, and you see Isaac with Jacob and Esau, and these sorts of things. And every time the second son is the one that gets the favor. And you see this, I think, again and again. This motif, I believe, is kind of an evidence for the fact that Yahweh is Enlil. You also have to look at the first 11 chapters of Genesis and understand that those stories came with, including the flood, including the Tower of Babel, all have Sumerian counterparts that were much earlier. And when you look at what's in Genesis, there's way less information. Even though we have only fragments of the Sumerian text, you can tell there's a more detailed story. It's almost like if you had an original text and then you go 1,500 miles and 2,000 years into the future, and this is what we remember about that text. It's kind of what those first 11 books of Genesis are. And it's in chapter 12 when Abram is called out of the city of Ur, a Sumerian city, and asked to kind of, go on this trek. And of course, he is the source of the three modern Western monotheistic religions. If you look at it, I mean, his two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, are thought to be the seeds of Israel and of the Arabs. And then, of course, Christianity spawns out of that. So that moment is very important to a lot of people in our history. And it's clear that he came from a Sumerian city. And it's very likely that the God who he knew and who called him out to go do this was a God that he was familiar with in his context. And he's telling him, you'll have no other gods anymore, just me. And that's kind of where we get into this monotheism, right? Away from the polytheism that had been before with the various Anunnaki. Now this is one Anunnaki saying, just me, none of them anymore. It's fascinating. And in my book, although it's a novel and fiction, I kind of get into this story a little bit, just speculating about how that might have happened and why that might have happened.
Yeah, no, honestly, I was lost there for a minute. I was really into where you were going with it. I really, really was. Carry on, don't stop.
So, I think the big question for us, a lot of this is really interesting. It's kind of like Ancient Alien show, right? say, when did they leave? Are they coming back? And I'm like, what if they never left? What if,
Yeah.
if we look at our world today and we think about the fact, we look at kind of their actions in the past, the Anunnaki as a whole, it seems like some have our interests at heart, some don't. We see a lot of chaos in our world today, a lot of conflict that seems unnecessary if we have just a little bit of common sense. And yet this stuff just kind of keeps rolling. And it made me wonder, are they still kind of pulling strings from the background a little bit? And what we might call in our modern world today, kind of the cabal, or, the people who are kind of pulling the humans that are kind of pulling the strings, is someone still pulling their strings? And all these secret societies that have come through time, are those, do they have their source with the Anunnaki or with various, lineages of the Anunnaki? And that's what's continuing to create the conflict on our planet. So I get into that a little bit into the novel as well. I guess the biggest thing is that if you believe the Sitchin narrative, we were created as a slave race, whether they left or they didn't. We've kind of been left in a less than ideal situation, with less than ideal clarity on where we came from and who we are. And it's been used to manipulate us. And I guess I just kind of feel like one of the reasons I'm writing this series is to try to raise some awareness of this and see if we can raise our vibration, raise our thoughts, and kind of escape the mindset of this, what I believe is a slave mentality in a lot of ways. And I think our cultures have kind of picked up on that in a variety of ways over time, and that we kind of are living that way. And we don't have to, I don't believe, because I think they violated. I think what's confusing is that, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, I think that a lot of people believe when they think about the personality they think of as God and who they're worshiping, I believe they're worshiping an Anunnaki mentality, not the cosmic creator of everything. And I think therein lies the problem, because the Anunnaki, even in the writings in the Sumerian texts, it talks about they knew they were crossing a line when they created us and took away our free will and made us worship them. And I believe they violated kind of a prime directive sort of thing of the universe, right? And so we're still suffering that. And so the idea is that we can have that connection to the true creator, but we have to kind of wipe this delusion away right now. But it's so embedded in our cultures that it's really hard to do that.
Yeah. So do you think it was maybe that part of the gene they put into us which gives us that human kind of need to worship?
Well, sure. I think they had a chance to modify us in a way that was beneficial to them. I think they made us afraid of them. You see that all through the Old Testament, right? Fear the Lord, fear, fear, fear.
Yeah,
and
everything is fit.
So I think they definitely, I think, wanted us to fear them. And I think, I think they basically created a gene to worship them. And I think when they maybe turned over more control of human society to kings, who we all know had divine right? Where did that come from? I think this kind of continued, and the human overseers continued to kind of manifest this kind of a culture because they realized it was to their benefit to keep everyone kind of in this mindset as well. And I think we see that straight through to today. Now, who that is may have shifted over time from kingly power to religious power to financial power and back again. But I think there's definitely been an overall agenda, I would say, to keep most of humanity kind of in the dark, confused, and living this 100 years or less that we're here and not really ever understanding why we're here or what we're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amount of people I think that I've spoke to since we've been in the community such a short time, everyone that's kind of on this journey has the feeling that there's something else, that it's not as it should be, that we are someone else, that, we don't have to accept the narrative that's there, because the narrative we are being told is a lie. And I'm not just talking about red pilling or anything like that. I mean, anyone that's ever felt different in their life about anything,
That's all right too.
it's totally all right to. And, the fact that you recognize that it's okay to do it
You can do
shows
it.
that everything possibly isn't all right. If you're already questioning, who am I? Where am I? Where do I really come from? Why do I never fit in anywhere? You never fit in because you are genuinely someone or something special.
Mm-hmm.
You're someone else.
Which is why, like so many of us, within our community, Ray, whether or not it's the ufology guys, whether or not it's the consciousness guys, to everyone else, they're absolute lunatics.
Mm-hmm.
But who's more on the money? Someone who wants to be like everyone else, who wants to be liked by their friends, liked by their community, liked by their social circle, or someone that's like, hang on a second, I'm none of that. I belong to something better. I belong to something greater. Belong to something even more. Which one's the fool? You know?
Well, 90% of the people would tell us that you and I are the crazy ones, but I would disagree, because I would say let's look at the world we have, trying it that way. Trying it your way. We have a lot of challenges, and frankly, it's not working out that well. And I would say you mentioned a gene a little while ago. I think they almost made a fenceless tyranny in our minds, and that we kind of self-hurt each other, right? There's something called the Overton Window, which I just actually learned about recently. It's a political science idea, but it really functions for any of these sorts of things. And it says there is in any society, there's an acceptable range of discussion. And you kind of see this with the left and so-called left and right media, especially in the United States. I don't know if it's as true in the UK as well, but
pretty much.
Fox News is over here, and that's as far to this way as you can go. That's acceptable. And MSNBC or something's over here, and that's as far this way as you can go. And if you think outside those boxes, you're a lunatic. And I think that's true in science. It's true in religion. It's true in these topics we're talking about now. And well-meaning people, well-educated people who are educating the system, who took that box of knowledge that society gave them and said, okay, that's all I need to know, will tell you that you're nuts. And it's like, it feels to me like they're kind of living a mass delusion sometimes. It's like I don't know if it's just fear that keeps them in line, but they just don't really, or maybe it's just they're too busy. There's a concept in Buddhism where they talk about the householder life, and that it's impossible for someone to gain enlightenment if they are, living the household life like we do. We have families and have a job and all these things. There's too many things going on to really go for the enlightenment in a life. You have to kind of like make that your path. You're never going to get there. And I think it's kind of like that with this, and that people are distracted in so many ways, and not in bad ways. I'm not saying leave your family or doing those things. I'm just saying that those things distract people in some ways that they just don't have the mental energy left to do it. And those of us who try to make it a point to do it get ostracized because we're willing to go outside that window that's acceptable.
Absolutely. And I think we're kind of very, very much living proof that it is doable. I mean, everything that you do, I mean, I know how hard you work. I follow your posts. Again, like for me, I mean, looking after a disabled wife, having, a small child, working full time as a sailor, doing research and bits and pieces for other people, doing my own podcast, doing my show every week, even more other little bits and pieces on top of that as well. But I'm still finding time to make it work, to get there, to try and learn about these things, because I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the truth will always out. And if you want to know, there is time, no matter what. Even if it's like, for me, I mean, any of the guys from work that are watching at the moment, they'll tell you during my coffee breaks, I'll take myself off and sit at another table while we're sat there. I'll still communicate with everyone, but at the same time, I'm going through all these different bits and pieces, looking at different articles, reading. I'll be copying bits and pieces, sending them to Sarah to look at. There is time. If you want to know the truth and you want to know about where we're from, where they're from, what we do, what they do, it's truly, truly possible. And
so basically what Dad does, he takes out all his break so he can basically do all of this for you guys. That's what I'm trying to say.
I wouldn't quite go that far, but yeah. I'm just trying to say that if you want to know the truth and what's out there, then there's always a time to make. Yeah, you can always make the time to do it, can't you?
That's always the word.
Yeah.
Research.
But you have to turn off the TV. I think that the challenging thing is that if you think I get this a lot. People say, well, they couldn't keep all this from us. If someone really knew this stuff, about UFOs or about our ancient past or that kind of thing, they couldn't keep all that a secret. And I'm like, think about your life. You sleep 8 hours a day. That's a third of your life right off the bat. You work another 8 hours a day. That's 2/3 of your life. You got to eat. There's certain things you do got to do with your family. You got to do all this stuff. And then we've created this thing where the TV culture kind of sops up much of the rest of that time, to the point people don't follow their dreams. They don't go try to, live the life they really want to live. They just kind of stay in this little circle, and they don't think about these things. You're right, there is the time, but that TV is kind of like it's like the wet towel sopping up the rest of that time that you don't have committed everything else. And this stuff just goes by people and they're like, how would they keep that a secret? It's like, you are distracted all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we never watch TV. We never watch it. Yeah, when we go to bed, then normally when we go to bed, what do we watch?
Art Bell.
We watch either Art Bell through YouTube or watch like a documentary on ancient civilizations, ancient aliens, everything that we're interested in. I mean, we got into a little phase a little while ago of watching like the really, really old, like 1970s and 80s UFO documentaries, because they were just great.
This is why I like these guys.
What, Mika? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
This is why I like these guys.
Because it frees up the TV for him to play Xbox.
Oh, that's awesome. But I love sports. I do, as much as anybody. And I'll turn on a game, but I don't live my life around that. And and I don't want anyone to think that I'm wagging a finger. That's not my intention in saying this. I'm just saying that, to your point, we have time. If we want to make the time, if we want to make it a priority to understand more about our life than just that little box of knowledge we were given, and we all accepted and swallowed, then there's time to do that if you want to. Now you're going to encounter resistance, because as you get big enough or well-known enough, or you make enough waves, you start realizing that there are a lot of forces out there that are not interested in this information coming out. And, that's another thing that I think kind of keeps people in line. It's like, they call you a conspiracy theorist. They've kind of used that for, it's been proven now that was in a CIA document after the Kennedy assassination. That's where that came from. They said, use that a lot and paint people as these crazy people. And now they've just been using it for 50 years now and everything. You're a conspiracy theorist. And most people don't, they remember, they remember in school when they were singled out for something and how embarrassing it was. And they don't want to be embarrassed in front of their friends to have someone call them a conspiracy theorist. It's okay. Believe me, I've been called one lots of times, and you live.
How's that working out for you? Okay.
It's working out okay. You get through it.
Right. So let's move on with the Anunnaki. So they've colonized Earth, and they've basically made us slaves for gold for their atmosphere. Where do we go from there, Ray?
Well, so at some point in time, the evidence is, and this actually gets even outside the Sumerian culture, I think you have to look across the board here, is that they divided up the earth into kind of regions of control. So you have, India, for instance. There's actually kind of descriptions of who had control of what thing. I forget how many, I think there were 12, I believe, that had control of this. At some point in time, though, it is my contention that either some of them left, were driven away, or I would say Enlil basically said, I am the only God. I don't really want all of these other, all my colleagues here being worshipped as a god. I want to be the guy. And I think that's what happened. I think that's where monotheism comes in. We know that it seems to have manifested first in Egypt, and eventually spread to places like the ancient Hebrews, the ancient Israelis, and then again, wider than that, basically. But I think at some point in time, he put his foot down and either kicked the other Anunnaki off Earth, sent them away, and he kind of took control. So I think that it's hard to know. Sitchin believes that they all left at some point. He seems to think that there was something related to their technology, that they didn't necessarily have the technology to come to Earth except at certain times when Nibiru came in close to the inner solar system. And I don't know about that. I think maybe they have technology for interstellar travel. I kind of took an opt-out on my book as far as Nibiru. It's kind of a red herring. I wanted to focus on what I think the Anunnaki have done and how they've molded our society and molded us. And there's a debate about, is there something in our solar system, another planet or not? I think what I will say about that is that if you go through time, over and over again, for various reasons, various scientists, going back to the 80s, there was the Planet X thing where they had the ERAS telescope, and they detected something out there, and it was a big thing for a while, and then it went away. And then Robert S. Harrington, who eventually became the head astronomer at the Naval Observatory here in the United States, continued that work. And 10 years later, he and Zecharia Sitchin wound up on a documentary together talking about the fact that Harrington was still looking for this planet X. It seemed to be very much how Sitchin described Nibiru. And then he suddenly died of a very rare cancer in really short order. And all of his colleagues said, nah, he had given up on that idea by the time he died. You get to 2006, there's another couple of scientists who again saw another reason why they believed that there was a large object in our outer solar system. That kind of went away. Daniel Whittemire was one of those at Louisiana University. And I actually have emailed back and forth with him a few times over the years. And he's kind of gone away from this idea now. But now we had JPL, the guy, I can't think of his name now off the top of my head, but he was the guy who killed Pluto. He even says that in his Twitter handle, who now believes that they have, again, they found this, they call it planet 10, I think, or the 10th planet or something, that he's planet 9. And he's tracking that, and they believe they have found evidence. They haven't located it yet, but they believe it's out there. So we have this recurring idea that kind of confirms what Sitchin said. Sitchin also said in the Sumerian text that, we don't really have a good explanation for why we have an asteroid belt in our solar system. His belief is that the text seemed to indicate that there was a planet called Tiamat that collided with Nibiru at some point in time. Part of that went off and formed the asteroid belt. Part of that formed the Earth, and the new Earth actually captured one of Nibiru's moons, which became our moon. And that's kind of the explanation for how our solar system got to be the way that it is. And that each time Nibiru passes through the inner solar system, it causes lots of chaos on Earth, which they believe, actually has been documented a couple of times in texts over time, going back, into the Sumerian texts and then forward. There's some dispute as to exactly when that happened and when it might happen again, if it is true. I'm agnostic on that. I'm not really sure that it comes in and causes chaos like that in the inner solar system, but I do think there's a body probably wandering around out there.
Yeah, it's because again, we've spoke about it many times, haven't we, about the moon, whether it's, we know it's hollow, but what was the use of it?
Was it made out of cheese?
It's definitely not made of cheese.
Well, I'm moving there. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
It'd be awesome.
My rocket full of crackers, and off I go. Right. See you in a few years.
Well, you could probably survive on there for almost gazillion years.
Yeah, but you'd be fat of cheese.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, how it's there, and there's been so much work done. Even from people from Linda Moulton Howe to David Icke.
Mm-hmm.
Again, even the rings of Saturn. There's an article out there that David Icke done about, Saturn isn't what you think it is. And again, going back to what we were saying earlier about possible theories, hypothesis, and things like that. We only know what they want us to know.
Exactly. And David Icke is a great voice about that. And, he gets a lot of heat for that, but he has been a great voice for a long time on these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, if it goes in 3,600 year cycles of Nibiru passing, because I've known of Nibiru for many, 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 many years. The whole Planet X thing, yep, totally. So it's not implausible to think that it's not there.
It is.
What, for instance, if it wasn't 3,600 years?
What happens if it was 1 year?
We'd know. We would have definitely seen it. So when you think about, when you say the Earth goes in 10,000 year stages, isn't it weird how things go in 10 stages of 10? Fashion and music, 10-year cycles. Earth cycles, 10,000 years. You don't know. We don't know.
Wait,
really.
This Earth has been going for 10,000 years?
This Earth has been going a lot longer than that, sweetheart. But there seems to be cycles where you go for a certain thing, and then the whole Earth gets amnesia about where it's come from, what's happened, and then goes on for another 10,000 years, and then whoops, it's happened again. We don't know.
Right. Okay.
Seriously.
X means 10, and it's the 10th planet.
Yeah.
Whoa.
That's it. That's why I love our audience.
Who did that? Who said that?
John.
Wow, John. That is some good
We
stuff
like that.
right there.
Yeah, we love our audience. So then, do we have any idea when they left, or what they left for us, or what needs to be deciphered?
Details.
Because I mean, we recently got a good copy of Chariots on DVD. The whole film is available on YouTube for you to watch, and there are certain bits and pieces they say on there with regards to the Anunnaki. So what evidence do we have, and what do we know, Ray?
Well, so I think this is this thing where we see these megaliths and structures all over the world, right? And things on top of mountains in South America where they would have had to pull stones. There's not even a rock like that to quarry on the mountain. They'd have to pull it from somewhere else, hundreds of miles away. The Giza pyramid. I mean, I have tried for years. I've literally sent emails to construction companies and engineering firms and asked them, could they do that? And they usually kind of laugh it off, but they don't really give me a straight answer. Now, so I think we have evidence that there are things that, at least as we understand ancient human culture and the technology that they supposedly had based on the mainstream narrative, we didn't have the technology to do these things back then. So we must have had some help. So I think one of two things is possible. It could be that some of these things are relics from one of these past go-arounds that we were talking about of a more advanced Earth civilization even than we have now. Or maybe we just listen to the hundreds of cultures around the world who say, someone came from the sky and gave us all this information and helped us do this stuff. Instead of dismissing that as, I mean, I'm not sure how it's academic to dismiss hundreds of cultures saying things like that as myth. Why do they all say the same thing? I mean, you go to the Native Americans, and here you go to the Aborigines in Australia, you go to Asia, you go to Africa, you go to Europe, all over the place, you have the same stories that someone came from up there and they came down here and they gave us the tools for civilization. So, this is where we kind of get into the modern era, where I don't think the Anunnaki are the only players anymore. I think the Sumerian story, and I think a lot of what happened in the Middle East and probably spread into Europe as far as the different sets of deities that we have that all seem to mirror this original Sumerian group. Probably there was a time when they ruled over the entire thing, but I think we have a lot of modern evidence that we have other races that also have come here and are also interacting. So I think the big question now is, do the Anunnaki still hold sway here? Have they been kind of booted out? Is there kind of a standoff going on here? Maybe some other races don't like the fact that they intervened here. I mean, you think of Star Trek, right? The Prime Directive. Maybe there's some races that are preventing nefarious races from doing things with us. And, as you guys know, as you've been doing more and more research in the UFO field, there's just tons of both experiencers and other information out there that seems to indicate that this Earth seems to be a significant prize in the cosmos, and there's a lot of stuff going on around it. So it's kind of hard, I think, when we get into the modern era to understand where the Anunnaki fit into all of that. But I would argue that to a large extent, they're still driving our political, economic, and religious structure in many ways, because I think all those legacy mindsets and things that started with them, with us worshiping them, us fearing them, were then, that power was then granted to human rulers that continued kind of that process. And I think you can follow that line of thinking all the way down to today, to where we are, where the few control the many. And that gets into a whole political thing, right? But I mean, it's true. I mean, most of the people on this planet are controlled by a very few people. So it's kind of like we're all living on a little bit of a sharecropping plantation in a way, right? And so you can kind of still see this going on.
I mean, the other thing as well, I mean, going back to a point that you made there, about them being sort of like, the spacefaring nation and stuff. I mean, the monolith on, Phobos, various other pyramids that have been found on Mars, other what seems like possible pyramids or remnants of pyramids that were found on the moon. it seems strange how everywhere you go, there's pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
Here, even some of the times.
Well, on here, I mean, you think about it. I mean, Sudan has such a massive collection of pyramids. I think
Well-
that's got the most pyramids of any country anywhere.
We've got 2, haven't we? 2 to 3.
No, you're thinking of mountains, sweetheart.
Oh.
No, we're on about proper pyramids,
Uh,
like in Egypt. So
well, Egypt has around about 10 to 20 of them.
does it? Are you sure?
Yep.
I told you a million and one times he doesn't exaggerate.
Well,
no,
of course,
oh,
you brought me up.
All joking
like that.
aside, though, I mean, yeah, it seems strange how you've got all of these different things that are so similar on the planets, i.e., Mars, Moon, us. I mean, there was something I was reading yesterday. I think it may have been in the Daily Grail, and that was to do with Titan. That
Mhm.
they found lakes that are very, very deep on Titan. You know, one of the moons of. So, you know, it's to think that we are the only one. I mean, we're going Fermi paradox here, totally, right? Where are they? We're not the only one. We're not. We're
Of course
not.
we're not.
And to think that, again, another thing that you mentioned as well is about religions coming down, but in the same thing, going back up. And
Mhm.
especially when we think about it at this time of the year now,
Mhm.
I know it's probably going to, if anyone's watching that's Christian, you may not hold the view that I'm about to say. But again, you know, the idea of Jesus rising, I mean, the size of the boulder to be moved.
That was.
And then what happens to him?
He just comes back alive, not like nothing ever happened.
And
just
then-
got. And then just risen up into the sky. Well, he couldn't really rise up to the sky without anything being there, precise. So there must have been kind of like a magnet in his back. Or
But again,
something.
it's not the only religious story of someone of
Mhm.
great importance rising to the sky. I can't do that. That hurts. So yeah. How do you feel about that?
Well, this is kind of a topic I'm tackling in book 2.
Oh,
It's a little bit of a dicey topic because people have very strong views on this stuff, and I, if I am right in my supposition that Enlil is the driving force behind the 3 Western monotheisms as we understand them today, I would say that I kind of take a somewhat Gnostic view of Jesus in that he was coming to kind of overthrow that system, and that he is connected to either the real creator of the universe or at least a higher level vibration than the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki, I think what we have to really make clear about them, if I'm saying that they're our gods for a lot of our religions, even to this day, they're just advanced beings, flawed beings, just like us. Why was God jealous? Why does God need 10% of everybody's money? Why did he need the first 10% from Cain and Abel? I mean, these are physical needs that are being expressed. These are beings that I would imagine the consciousness that could have created this entire universe as we understand it probably doesn't have physical needs in that way. So there's a lot of clues there that we're dealing with advanced but physical and flawed beings, even in our own religious texts that are saying that. And I think that where I'm going with book 2, the kind of a preview, is that I think Jesus, Buddha, perhaps a few other teachers came and were trying to remind us who we really are, trying to escape that paradigm and get beyond that and try to fix this intervention that has kind of gotten us off kilter and off course.
wow.
Which is why they wanted him dead.
Yeah, of course. But again, through so many different religious scripts as time's gone by, there are so many similarities, right?
Absolutely. Over and over again.
There's no way that it can be just one big, massive coincidence. What if they're all in league together?
That's
you
cool
go,
how you
dudes.
both do that together.
Did he do that at the same
He
time
did it
as
too,
well?
yes.
What?
You went like this and he went.
No, that was me because I was actually just scratching right there.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
no, and I'm looking straight in the cam, so I can't actually see what he's doing. Scary child.
You do know we are a match.
I should hope so. Are we?
Well, I think I'm a boy, so
So, sorry. Right, let's carry on because it's not going to be
No.
too long before we hit questions, and I want to try and get some more out of Ray. So, what other evidence do we have? Do you want to talk a little bit about the tablets for anyone that doesn't have a clue about the
Tablets?
Sumerian tablets?
Yeah, so we have the Sumerians were the first culture again to develop writing, and they wrote in a lot of times they were cylinder seals, also some tablets in something called cuneiform, where they actually took a little piece of reed or something like that, and they carved their characters into that, and then they would basically bake it, and that would store it. So we have about 100,000 of these tablets that we have uncovered over the last 140 years or so. And only probably I've seen estimates anywhere from 20 to 30% of them have been interpreted. So there's a lot that no one's ever interpreted. What we've found so far, again, is that we see numerous examples of information being, feeding those first 11 chapters of Genesis from these books. Again, the basis of the three Western monotheisms. So really important stuff. I think a couple things that Sitchin brought out is he has there's and I believe it's in Britain in one of the museums there that has what he believes depicts a evidence that they knew about what the solar system looked like. There's a depiction of what looks like a star with the planets exactly matching what they would look like if you put them in orbit based on their sizes and their positions, and an extra planet, which he says is Nibiru. There's been a lot of hullabaloo about this over the years, saying that's not a star. That's they're not. That's that they couldn't have known that. And this is kind of the answer, right, to any evidence that you put forward that these people knew stuff they should not have known. And that is that they couldn't have known that. So therefore, it must be false. That must not be what it is. They come up with another story for what that is. But it looks pretty clear that that is a solar system. I think we have the scientific evidence for his theory about the collision of the planet. I think that makes a lot of sense about how the asteroid belt was formed. I think it makes a lot of sense around how. Oh gosh, I am having a real problem today with things just going right out of my head.
Is it the pressure being on Fascination Street?
It might be. This is harder than Fade to Black. No,
you get interrupted by breaks every 15 minutes or anything, but you're on the go here now, buddy.
Yeah. So there's I think we have both textual evidence that I think flows right out of the Sumerian into our modern religious texts. I think we have the evidence of, as we talked about, the megaliths and the commonality of this stuff all over the world, that over and over again are saying the same thing. And I just think you can't dismiss all of this. I think there's no way to have a straight face and do a Neil deGrasse Tyson and say, ha, 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 that can't be true. It's just all myth. Why is everyone repeating the same thing? Why do we have the pyramids all over the place? Why do our all of our mythologies, at least in a large part of the ancient world, have almost the exact same god? It's almost like the same 12 characters if you really kind of flesh them out a little bit. Obviously, we're talking about a common story here. We don't have evidence for how human beings came in a Darwinian sense. We don't know how modern human beings suddenly emerged out of nothing. So this idea that we were genetically modified and upgraded makes a lot of sense. So there's just all these different proof points. I mean, it might not be enough for some people who want to hold on to a different idea, and that's fine. I'm not here trying to convert anybody, but I do think that for someone to say that there's no evidence, there's no reason to think that this is possible, I just don't buy that. And then I think we also have to look at the fact that we don't know enough to know whether or not faster than light travel is possible. And if it is, it could be that we've been visited from the very beginning on this planet. And our myths may be the stories that give us the evidence for the fact that that's the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at where we're going at the moment, kind of warp drive propulsion, plasma propulsion, and all these other bits, I mean, where would that idea have come from? Because you're going to be going faster than light there, right? With warp drive.
Absolutely.
So obviously it's got to be possible. And if they're that more advanced than what we are, then chances are they will. I mean, one of the best things that I heard this week, I don't know if you caught our show last week with Philip Mantle, but I found that he was on a radio show, which is available through YouTube, and it's through the Paranormal UK Radio. And they were having a round table. There was him, I think it was Paul Sinclair and Chris Evers, and they do a show, all three of them. And the best analogy I've ever heard of the UFO phenomena was it's like putting a television in an ant's nest. They'll crawl all over it, but yet they'll have no concept of what it does. And I think we're kind of at the same thing, not just with ufology, but with many other different bits and pieces within this field.
Absolutely. I think, we can go clear to the end of that spectrum. What can we really know? We could start there, right? I mean, I was joking with someone yesterday that, it's kind of this old joke, right? That we could be a pimple on something's, our whole universe could be a pimple on someone's, we don't know because we're inside it. So it's, leg. Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. We don't know. I mean, our context, we have no frame of reference, but if we even just want to accept our reality as we understand it, you're right. Now, I don't think the Anunnaki are that advanced that we wouldn't understand them coming to us, but there could be races that have interacted with us that are coming from different dimensions, are coming through time or things like that, that we, like you say, we're kind of the ants crawling all over the TV, right? It's there, but we don't really recognize what we're even looking at, they're so far beyond us that we just can't even conceive, who they are. I think that's really entirely possible. I think there's an arrogance in our modern thinking as well that we have to be the chief dog. We must be the top of the pile. And I don't think there's any evidence that that this is as far as someone can advance. And if you take our civilization and give us another 10,000 years or 100,000 years or a million years, what could we do? Look what we've done in the last 50 years, even the last 20 years. I mean, we all walk around like this all day long. And if you beam someone from 1995 to today, they'd go, what is everybody doing? Why is everybody walking around like this all the time? That was not even in anybody's reality then. So I do think that we're just, I think that I like what David Icke talks about, because he talks about our consciousness and the fact that we've got to raise our consciousness. And I think as long as we think just in mundane terms, we can't really get out of this cage. I think we have to see who we really are and what we're really capable of. And I do think there's a spiritual aspect to this. I think as long as we just continue to consume what's in the media and all of this thing, we will continue to kind of repeat the same process that we've been going through for 10,000 or 40,000 years or whatever, and we're not going to move forward. But if enough of us can go higher than that, then I think there's a chance for us to escape and really join this galactic community that's out there. I think some of them are ready for us to do that, but others I think are still blocking us.
Absolutely. And it's kind of making sure we raise our own vibration, which is why I think so many of us all kind of gravitate to each other, because we all know that there's something more, that it's not the same, and we all kind of recognize the vibration in each other. I mean, it's the same as everything, frequency, vibration, and energy. You're going to connect. And the people that we have around us, because, you and I speak quite a lot, and the people around us are sterling people, but yet we're all across the world, but yet we kind of know and think the same way. And that's kind of what's brought us all together. So,
And wouldn't have been possible 20 or 25 years ago. You would have been there in England. I would have been here. Someone else would have been somewhere else. And I think it was easy to feel back in the day for everyone to feel like they were all alone. And now we're starting to wake up and go, wait a minute, I'm not the only one that thinks this stuff. And we're building a global community, which I think will be a tide that could wash away this status quo, and get us where we need to go.
Yeah, no, I can agree more. Right. Are you ready for the
I am
chat
ready.
room? The dreaded chat room. Right.
It's not dreaded. Our
Do you need to get a drink or anything first?
Our listeners are also.
Do I need more than water? No, I'm kidding.
Yes, you do. You do.
Drink.
Is Mia with you? Is she nice and comfortable?
She's in the other room, so.
Right. Okay, here we go then. Dun, 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 dun.
poison their toys.
I can't help it. I love it.
Okay, we've had lots of questions in.
Okay.
Got a few people in the chat. We've got a few regulars in the chat as well, and we've got some newcomers as well.
Hello, everybody.
Okay. So, Jonaside has asked, how tall were the Anunnaki?
Well, most people believe, both from the visuals that we have in some of the ancient Sumerian graphics, as well as some of the writings, that they probably were somewhere between 7 and 9 feet tall. So they definitely were larger physically than we are.
Okay, wow. Davey has asked, to your knowledge, is there any direct connection with the Anunnaki and the Druids, or Arthurian legend? And if not, what was going on in Europe during the time of the Anunnaki?
That's a really good question. It's been many years ago since I studied Druid stuff, so I'm not really sure that I am probably an expert to answer that. I think that eventually this strain of what started in Sumeria did spread into Europe. I think it definitely got into the Greek and Roman mythologies, but I think Northern Europe was kind of its own thing, honestly. I think there was a different dynamic going on there. Now, I do think that, how the populations got dispersed, we have a number of different things, even in the Bible, how that might have happened. But I think the populations did get dispersed at some point in time. But I think the Druids probably are somehow, maybe some of the first rebels, I don't know, who kind of rejected this system, this control system, because, what I know about them is they were very much self-actualized, sought a spiritual path that was very much like the Gnostics. And we do have these strains throughout history of groups that tried to go around this system and kind of have this direct connection with the universe or with God. And I think that the system has tried to shut that down where they can. But I don't know of any direct connections, or what the connection would be between those. I would see the Druids as being more independent. And I also think that the Arthurian legend's really interesting. I think there are a lot of metaphors in that legend that are in kind of this, what Joseph Campbell talked about, the hero's journey. And I think the Arthurian legends, in fact, he even wrote a book talking about this largely, that those follow that pattern. And I think that pattern does come from a lot of these mythologies that we are talking about. So I think that's what would be the link there, probably.
Okay. We've just had Mark into the chat. He wants to know, where are the Anunnaki now?
Well, there's some dispute about that. As I say, Zachariah Sitchin believes they left at some point in time. I'm not convinced that they all did. Some of them obviously probably went back to Nibiru, which was their home planet. I believe that some of them either are still here on Earth, kind of pulling some of the strings, or at the very least are in communication with the humans that are kind of running the planet for them. In my novel, and the reason I wrote it in the form of a novel and not as a nonfiction book, is I wanted the freedom to kind of speculate. But I believe that there's still a lot of our economy and the way things are set up are still being kind of pulled, and that we're sort of a profit center for them in a way. And so I definitely believe that some of them still have influence, if not direct control of what's going on here on Earth.
Okay. John has asked, so if the Anunnaki were the Sumerian gods, were they also gods of Egypt, Greek, Norse, Aztecs?
Yeah, so as I think we talked about in the discussion a little bit, at some point in time, according to the text, the Anunnaki divided up the entire planet. And we see this even in the Bible. There's references to different tribes around the Israelites, including the Israelites being ruled by different gods. And, Yahweh was the God of Israel, right? But, we had Baal over here with the Canaanites, and we had, all these different things. So I think this system at some level was global at some point. I think that the patterns of the gods, if you look at the literally the personalities that came from the Sumerian gods, you see them reflected in some of the stories in the Egyptian, even in Norse. Even when you get into Europe and beyond Greece and Rome, you still see some of the same god characters, the same kind of pantheon of gods, if you will, with a lot of the same stories, a lot of similar motifs. And this is where I think the mythology does become interesting. Why I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell is because he spent most of his career really looking for the connections between these different stories around the world, and found a lot of agreement on a lot of these points, both in what their spiritual teachings are, and a lot of the stories. There's like these universal motifs that he wrote off as something that might be something subconscious. There might be something in the human subconscious that makes these same stories come up over and over again. But I believe it was all linked to this actual group of gods, these beings that were in Sumeria, that this kind of filtrated out through the Middle East and Europe for sure, but probably all over the world.
Okay. John has asked, if the Anunnaki are still here, where are they located?
Well, I don't have an address.
Zip code.
So here's what I would say about that. If you, I would say that, and it could not be the Anunnaki. Like I said at the very beginning here, I don't have all the answers. I'm not claiming that I do. I attribute this to the Anunnaki, but there are other people that contribute, that would say this is because of things like the archons or things like that. But there's a definite trend in our world where it seems like the planet runs in a way that is directly counter to what would benefit humanity and really move it forward. And by humanity, I mean the bulk of us, right, who live and work and die and all of that every day. And you just see that, with the chaos and the wars, and there's some force that seems to be trying to divide us and keep us in conflict. And you see throughout the myths, there's a number of myths about this. You have the myth with the ancient Greeks where they separate. This is where the whole idea of the soulmate came in. The Greek gods were worried that human beings were going to be greater than them someday. So they divided us into male and female, so we would have to spend our entire lives searching for our opposite. The Tower of Babel is another story like that. We have the gods, plural, in that story, you notice, even though that's in the Bible, talking about the fact that they're worried that human beings are going to ascend to heaven and become like them. And so they messed up our languages basically and dispersed us, right? So that we do see this this trend of trying to divide us. And I think what we see in the world today, despite our best efforts to change this to this point, I still believe we have it within us to change it. There's some force that seems to be nefarious, seems to be working against our interests, that seems to keep pushing world history and world events away from human beings coming together to do that. And I would attribute that to the Anunnaki. So I can't give you an address, but I believe that is partly their influence that's driving that.
Okay. Are you familiar with Michael Lee Hill and his claim that he is Enki?
I am.
Okay.
He's actually reached out to me when I wrote my book. He and several people who also believe that he is Enki have reached out to me. I am not one to say, hey, that's not possible. I don't know. But I guess I would, just like any of this, and I would expect the same thing for the things I'm saying, go do your own research and find the evidence for yourself. But, I wouldn't put it beyond the realm of possibility. I think it's possible they could. I think we reincarnate, so I think they probably do too. I think it's possible that he could have reincarnated in that system. So I'm familiar with his claim. I'm not really familiar with what he's saying about Enki or all of this, but I am familiar with him.
Okay. Did the Anunnaki have elongated skulls?
Well, they definitely looked like us. So there's a lot of people that think that they were reptilian. I don't think they were reptilian. I think based on, if you really do some deep research here, I think you'll find that they might have been aligned with a reptilian race. I don't know that there's a lot of evidence that they had elongated skulls. I believe they looked very much like us, but larger. I think you see that even in the Bible in Genesis that talks about, which was drawn from those Sumerian texts, that says that we were made in their image. So I think that while anything could have been genetically modified out of us in that process, I think that basically they created us to look very much like a smaller, dumber version of them, to be honest with you.
Talk for yourself. I look wonderful.
You do. I was talking about everyone but you, Jimmy.
Oh dear! Don't. It just gets bigger and bigger. Okay.
That's why I wear the hat. Look, no elongated hat.
Okay. Have you heard about the Stasis Anunnaki video from Russia? It may have been Russia, or it may have been Iraq or Iran. John's not too sure.
I have not heard of that. No.
Okay.
I'm sorry, John.
Like I say, I'm not quite sure about that one. See, most of these are from John, because he's one that just piles questions because he loves to know everything, and he's amazing.
Elongated ears. Thanks, Mark.
It had to come from someone.
Well, I'm surprised Pat isn't here. I know Jeff's not here because I think he's out in Albuquerque with Sue and Otter. So,
Okay.
Jeff, wherever you are watching, if you are watching, much love from us over here. And if you're sat with Sue and Otter watching, much love to all in Albuquerque from us.
Okay, John's actually asked, in the background that you've got flashing the images, is that Lloyd Pyle on your computer in the background?
Yes, Lloyd Pye. So Lloyd I loved Lloyd. He's passed away here a few years ago, but again, of a fast-moving cancer. I hate to keep bringing that up, but that happens a lot with people who challenge the paradigm. But he was probably, I think, even better than Zecharia Sitchin, probably the best at articulating the theory that Sitchin had. And where he came across Sitchin is interesting because he actually was a anthropologist and was studying the evolution of humanity. And he'd run into this kind of a block where he couldn't make the leap that kind of the mainstream asked you to make between our supposed ancestors and us and how we emerged. And then when DNA kind of became a thing, then it really became clear that we happened very quickly. And he was out looking for an idea that would basically explain that. And he came across Sitchin's idea that we were genetically engineered and became a very strong advocate for that for the rest of his life. So he would do a great spiel. You can go out on YouTube even to this day and find there's a great video. It's about 2 hours. It's called Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong. And he goes through the anthropological basis for why he believes that we do not come from what Darwinians say we came from, the other hominids on this planet, that we are something completely apart from that. And that he fills in the blank of that with Sitchin's theory about the fact that we were genetically modified, and really bought into the whole theory with Nibiru and the whole thing, and is a great advocate for that, was a great advocate for that theory. Really miss him.
Okay.
John loved him too.
Yeah. John says, are we just a Anunnaki cargo cult?
An Anunnaki cargo cult?
Yes.
Well, I think that there's a danger in that. I don't particularly belong to any type of a cult. So I think where this is coming from, and John maybe can clarify, but I think since Zecharia Sitchin died, there's been an attempt, a very avid attempt, to try to undermine everything that he wrote about. And one of the things that's been brought about is that he's just kind of a cult figure. He made all this up. He didn't really have any background in linguistics, and this isn't real. It's fabricated, and that this is just a cult. I don't subscribe to that at all. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't people who feel that way, but I certainly don't. I'm not looking for a cult. I'm just looking for answers. And I feel like this theory fills in a lot of holes for me in my own research. I started from mythology. Joseph Campbell, that's what the first thing I started with 25 years ago. And it led me to this. And I really feel like this best explains, better than creationism as we know it today, better than, we have this debate, it's Darwinianism against creationism. And as Lloyd Pye used to say, interventionism may be the better answer than either one of those. And that's what I happen to think. So I don't try to hold any personalities into esteem that beyond what they deserve. I think Sitchin's ideas I think my ideas are flawed. I'm sure they are, and to some extent. But I think we we shouldn't be afraid to go there, but we shouldn't make a cult out of it for sure.
Okay. John's asked, have you ever seen a UFO yourself?
I've actually seen 3 UFOs. As Jimmy probably knows, I detailed these in quite a bit of detail on Fade to Black about 18 months ago when I was on. But I saw 2 within about 3 weeks of each other in 1991. One of them, I was working a job at night where I was going in and out of the building all night long, and there was this light that looked like the color of a street light, kind of. It was hanging up in the sky the entire night. And when I left to go home, I lived about 15 miles from where I worked, and it was down kind of a major highway in the city that I was in. And this thing followed along the highway by the tree line that ran along the highway, all the way to when I got to my apartment. When I got up in my apartment, I watched it dip below the skyline. And it was late, like 11:30 at night. I was tired, so I fixed something to eat, turned the TV on, and started watching TV. And the next thing I know, this thing comes back up, comes across the highway, comes over our parking lot, probably about 100 feet in the air. And it's still this kind of yellowish color that it had been all night. I couldn't really tell the shape or the size of it. And as I'm standing there watching, all these multicolored lights come on. You could see it on the parking lot. Red, blue, green, all this thing. And then after about 15 seconds of this thing shoots off to the southwest. I mean, way faster than any jet. About 3 or 4 weeks later, I saw another one that did exactly the same thing, except when I got to my apartment, it went up high up in the sky, almost like in a high orbit, and kind of blinked out to a kind of a bluish dot that very much looked like a star. If I hadn't seen that happen, I would have thought it was a star. I waited about 2 hours and I came back out, and of course the rest of the sky had shifted and this thing was still sitting there. The third one was some years later. In 2006, I was on a business trip actually coming back into Chicago O'Hare. We were kind of circling over Lake Michigan waiting to land. And even though it was very late at night, there were several other commercial planes in the pattern. I could see 2 or 3 other planes kind of behind us in a loop over the lake waiting to land. And all of a sudden, this white light comes shooting up from below us, and it was being chased by what was obviously a fighter jet. And this thing was maneuvering in ways the jet could not keep up with. And eventually, after about 15 seconds of this, it shot straight up and just left the jet in its wake. So I think that was maybe the most interesting one, because to me, I don't think you would see a fighter jet going into a commercial air pattern with a bunch of commercial airlines right there unless they were in hot pursuit of something. And so, no explanation of that. I don't know what happened. Never heard anything about it in the paper, but those are the 3 UFOs that I've been lucky enough to see. I'd love to see more.
Okay. Mark has asked, do you think Roswell was an alien or human incident?
I think it was alien. I think that cover up, I don't think that was really the beginning of the UFO era, so to speak, but I do think that was after World War II was over. I think that was really what started the decision to cover this up. I think there's tons of evidence. Richard Dolan is so good at documenting all of this. He's gone through and really found all the documents that, before the Freedom of Information Act became kind of a joke. You actually could get some of this stuff, and he has done great research in detailing how that all happened. And honestly, that's what gave us the national security states that we have today. This was one of the reasons, in addition to the Cold War, that really set up that system. And so a good reason why it needs to be broken. But yes, I do believe that was an alien incident.
Okay. Mark, you have asked where are the Anunnaki now. We have answered that, and it's earlier on in the show, so you may have to rewatch again. He's also asked, are the Anunnaki the builder race?
If by the builder race he means the race that maybe is like the source of all life in the galaxy, so to speak, I don't think so. I don't think they're that advanced. Lloyd Pye also talked about this, that they're, he talked about the, I can't think of it now, the prokaryote something. There's bacteria that we know was the source of all life on Earth that wouldn't have seemed to have been able to appear here. And he talked about a builder race that must have been involved on Earth for billions of years and perhaps elsewhere in the galaxy. The Anunnaki have not, in my opinion, had advanced technology for that long. They are maybe a few hundred to a few thousand years ahead of us technologically. I don't think they're at that level. I think he's talking about a kind of a species that might have spawned life across the galaxy, and I don't believe the Anunnaki are that advanced.
Okay. Mark has asked, is the Anunnaki benevolent or malevolent?
Yes.
Both.
Both. It depends on who. My contention is, and there are people who flip this completely. There are people who disagree with this. I believe that Enki and his clan, so to speak, generally have a positive view of humanity. I think you see this. So we didn't get into this, and this is actually always a dicey topic for me to talk about. But so in Sumeria, you had Enki and Enlil. You had this division. They're both equals, brothers, gods, deities in that system. By the time we go a couple thousand years and 1,500 miles or 1,000 miles to the west, and we get to Genesis, I believe that Enki has become so demonized because he helped humanity in the flood and warned us and helped us survive against orders, basically, that he has now become the virtual, devil that we see in the Garden of Eden. And I actually think that we may have that wrong. I think that that was someone telling us that we do have access to the knowledge that we're being told that we shouldn't have access to. And I think he was actually trying to befriend us. So I believe that Enki has on a number of occasions tried to help us. Enlil on a number of occasions, in my opinion, has tried to destroy us. So I think they're both benevolent and malevolent. And I think there's been kind of a standoff with a lot of chaos in the middle of that.
When isn't there? Okay. Tinette has asked, do you think UFO movies are partial disclosure, i.e. partly based on real events?
Yeah, I think some definitely are. I think people get access to certain pieces of information, and so I think Richard Dolan makes a good case about this. How would they really come out now and all in one fell swoop do disclosure? Because they have to basically say, we've been lying to you for 70 years. We've covered all this up. We've spent all this money we didn't tell you about. There's got to be a slow, easy way to do that. So I definitely think there has been stuff fed into the media. It's interesting. A couple of the stars of the X-Files back in the day said that there were a lot of alphabet agency types that used to hang around that show and feed them information to feed into that show for some of the storylines. Now, you could take that as being disinformation, which it obviously could be. They could be doing that, or they could be slowly disclosing. So I think definitely some of the things we see in movies are to be taken seriously and are an attempt to kind of do this slow roll disclosure. But I will say this, partial disclosure is still not disclosure.
Yes, absolutely.
I want full disclosure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do know that we had John D'Souza on as a guest a little while ago, and he did tell us that some of the cases that were on X-Files was actually true cases that they'd used that were dramatized.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Mark has asked, what is the significance of the bag held by the Anunnaki?
I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit.
What is the significance of the bag that is held
by
the Anunnaki? Yes.
Wow. Well, I happen to believe there's something called May, M-E, that is a power that the Anunnaki had that Enlil seemed to be in control of. There's a story of Inanna getting control of that from him. And I kind of delve into this a little bit in the book with a different twist on it. I believe that's what that was. There are a lot of people who believe different things about that. There's definitely a big thing. It's kind of been a big thing online the last couple of years about what are the bags they're all carrying around. So I believe it's May. It's like this kind of almost supernatural power to see the future and do different things that they were carrying around. But I'd be interested in hearing what your audience thinks, because I know there are a lot of different opinions on that, and I certainly don't know what it was.
Okay. Mark,
Force.
the Force.
It's the Force.
The Force. Yes, may the Force be with you. Well, and that's why I was surprised. They kept, that's why it was such a big deal that Inanna stole that, because that was the power even among them. So
Wow.
Okay. Mark's asked, why are some of the Anunnaki depicted with wings?
well, I think we have to understand that art was done by the ancient Sumerians or ancient humans, and I think that they, I really don't have a definitive answer. My opinion is that either depicts the fact that they were capable of flying, perhaps not them physically themselves, but that they flew. They could have been ceremonial, but I really don't have a good answer other than an opinion on what that is. To be honest with you, I don't think it's because they are a bird race or reptilian. I think they were humanoid, and I think that evidence for that is pretty strong.
Okay. John's asked, what about the wristwatch that the Anunnaki wear?
It's an Apple Watch.
Boom, boom.
Yeah, it's technology, I think. I mean, I think this is definitely technology. Maybe it was a way they communicated with each other at a distance, yeah. I mean, I think we're just seeing, again, the ancient humans giving us clues to the fact these guys had, maybe they wore spacesuits. They had this technology, and we're just seeing that kind of coming through these images.
Okay. And the last one I've got is from Tinette. How about the Ankh?
The Ankh? A-N-K? I'm not sure I understand what the would she want to elaborate on that? I'm not sure what she's talking about.
Right, question lines are open for 1 more minute, just for you, Tinette. So
okay, Tinette, elaborate, please, love. So, yeah, but what amazing questions that the audience have come up with.
Absolutely. You have a great audience. And
Oh,
they know that, and they know their stuff too.
Oh, yes.
Most of them are Fadenauts.
What is it?
What is Ankh?
Yes.
The Egyptian symbol.
I'll have to plead the fifth on this. The Fifth Amendment here in the U.S., where you plead silence. I really don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, we don't expect everyone to know everything.
Would she share with us though? Because I would like to know.
What do you think it is, Tinette? Well, John says he's read all the stitching books.
Mm-hmm.
Stitching.
It's stitching.
Oh, yeah, let's put stitching. An Ankh.
No.
No.
Okay. No problem. Well, that's it. Questions closed from the chat room. Thank you so much for answering all of those, Ray.
Something like a cross.
Oh, something like a cross. Does that make any sense to you?
Well,
symbol like a cross.
Oh, okay. I don't know a lot about that, honestly. I think I do know what she's talking about now. I mean, the cross was a symbol in a lot of places before Christianity took it, but I don't really know much about that. Sorry.
That's not a problem at all. Okay, I'm going to pass you back to the boys. Thank you so much for answering those, Ray.
Thank you, guys.
Right, 2 seconds.
All right,
I'll
do it.
We're done. It's all right. Right, come on. Spin it. Not too fast. You make Ray feel dizzy. Wow.
I think I've been dizzy for 2 hours. I don't know. Nothing that came. You can't trust anything that came out of my mouth. Honestly, no.
That's what Mrs. Ray said as well. Sorry, Ray. So, how was the experience for you? Was it okay?
It was awesome. I love the energy, guys. I love what you're doing, and I'm excited for you because I know you have some bigger plans for this. And I'm just honored to be here. And I hope, sometimes I do these interviews. I always go do a re-listen to them after the fact, and sometimes I feel like I did great right in the moment, and other times I'm not sure. And I'm not sure today. I think I answered the questions and did the best I could on them. But I'm I'm just excited to be here, and I would love to come back and talk about some other things because I think there are a lot of topics that are so important and important to me right now. So,
Well, anytime there's always an open door here, and vice versa. You ever need us or
absolutely.
anything like that, all you got to do is ask. Right, so Ray, Joe, just to sum up, is there anything else that you want to add? Anyone you want to give a shout out to? Any other appearances you've got coming up soon? Any other shows that you're doing?
I am going on the Ancient Aliens, the Facebook page group, on Monday, I believe. I think they want to talk about it. It's Earth Day, and they want to talk about some positivity. So I think we're going to do some affirmation spot stuff, even though it's the Ancient Aliens page. I'm going to be on that on Monday. And just check out Sixth Sense Media. Dennis Snappy the second, my partner in crime there, he does a podcast every week as well called the Seeker Podcast. And I mean, Dennis goes down some holes, and he's working with some really interesting remote viewers right now. And just listen to his show because he's got a lot of cool things going on. So just want to give a shout out to him.
And he's quite a cool guy as well.
He is, absolutely.
Absolutely, because you guys are always in our shout outs anyway. So
we appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Love, support, promote. That's always the way.
Absolutely. And you guys
Excellent.
do. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Always there. All right, Ray. No worries at all. So thank you very much for joining us. And
Thank
we
you,
will
guys.
speak to you soon.
All
Cheers,
right,
buddy.
thank you. Take care.
See ya.
Bye, guys.
Right. Bye-bye. So where we are now then. So we've had a fantastic show with Ray. We've talked about everything that we really need to talk about this week, haven't we? Is there anything else that you can think of, Sarah?
No, not that I can think of.
No.
We've got some shout outs to do.
We'll do the shout outs in a mo.
Yeah.
We've got the second podcast coming out on Thursday.
Yes. Yes.
Which hopefully, if Mika's not too tired after football or soccer practice, soccer, he'll be joining us as well. If he's not too tired, that is. So you'll actually have the whole 3 Pearsons for the price of 2 in one evening. It doesn't get much better than that. Have you got anything else there?
Next week we have.
Oh yes, next week we've got our beginner's guide to psychics, and we are having
our good old friend Sabrina.
You don't normally remember what guests we've got, but you remembered Sabrina perfectly.
I totally don't remember her name every time.
Sabrina. Everyone loves Sabrina. So we're really, really lucky to have Sabrina, who is possibly by far one of the most gifted people that we have. And as usual, Sabrina will be taking questions from the chat room. I've got a funny feeling it could probably turn into yet another evening of psychic readings as well along the way. So don't be surprised if that happens. So our shout outs tonight. So
Natasha, we'll do it one each.
You've got the important one first.
Mods.
Our moderators in the chat room. That's you. No, you did that one.
Natasha.
Erik Stitt at Erik Stitt Art.
Dave Shadows.
Dave Shadows of Your Mind. Dave Partridge.
I'll just say that.
Brett, also known as Inquire Within. I'll do this one.
Okay.
Who also is doing our music for
our podcast. Yes. Thank you very much for the music for our podcast, Brett, which is also going to be one of the singles on his new album. Davey, Brandon, C-Dubs, Kelly, our new viewers, Jasmine, hello there. And basically the biggest shout out of all to all of those of you that have watched this.
Taken out 2 hours of your beautiful day.
Fair enough.
And we hope you have a good day.
We do, especially considering that it's Easter.
Afternoon.
It's Easter weekend. And one last thing as well, an exclusive. If you're on our fan page, you'd already have seen this. But we have secured, and we're just in talks at the moment for a date where we're actually going to get Calvin Parker with us, who was one of the Pascagoula abductees. We're aiming for May, but we will keep you posted on that. Very, very excited for that. Sarah has been speaking. And again, we are just waiting on a date. So that'll be very, very cool. And also, we're looking at getting Philip Mantle back again because he seemed to have absolutely knocked it out of the park. And you guys seem to have really, really liked him. So that's it. Also, Mika has been making little bracelets. I got a Rasta bracelet.
Oh, hang on.
Oh.
So-
He's moving again. Stop moving. So, yeah, got my raster bracelet. And he did say to any of our moderators, if you would like one of his handmade bracelets, if you could message Sarah with what colours you like.
One time, children, one at a time. One time.
If you could message Sarah with what colours you like and send her your address, he will make them and he will send them to you. It can either be for you, one of your partners, or one of your children if you have them. But he's going to make it himself and he's going to send it to you.
It might take maybe a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months.
We're going to get a
couple of
production
years,
line. All of our moderators and that.
But it might.
Production line.
Yeah.
Do you want to do your clothes?
Okay. Right, we got this. I am Mika Pearson. You are your co-host, your host, Jamie Pearson, and your producer, Sarah Pearson, and Fascination Street Dog.
He is there,
Yeah.
but he's fast asleep.
So, I am Mika Pearson, your co-host, Jimmy Pearson, your host, Sarah Pearson, your producer, and then Dougie does nothing. Okay,